Hello again. I've often remarked on the strange fact that modern anti-Semites are often more strict than Adolf Hitler and his Nazis when it comes to defining who is and who is not a Jew. This is particularly so when the need to prove that this or that person is Jewish ties in with some favourite anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. Yesterday I was asked by somebody commenting here if I would cover the subject of the supposedly Jewish roots of communism in Russia. The idea is known as Judeo-Bolshevism or sometimes Jewish Bolshevism. I'm reluctant to waste my time on such foolishness, but perhaps this is an idea which needs to be debunked. Briefly, the idea is that just as capitalism is essentially a Jewish racket, and that it is used to control our lives, so too was communism. This was devised by the Jews as yet another way of dominating the world. From this perspective, much of post-war history, the whole of the Cold War in fact, saw two great Jewish schemes ruling the world while pretending to be in opposition. On the one hand, the Rothschilds, and on the other, the Jewish Bolsheviks. Cunning, eh? To prove that this was so, it was necessary to show that Jews instigated and controlled the Russian Revolution, and this is where the whole thing rather falls flat on its face. It's because of this reason that Lenin's ethnicity enters the picture. If he was a Jew, this would enormously strengthen the Jewish Bolshevism hypothesis. I must pause at this point and apologise to ordinary people listening to this. You will readily see why I couldn't see much point in spending time on such nonsense, but there we are. In the last few decades, the idea has been floating around in certain places that Lenin was really a Jew. Okay, in Nazi Germany, a Jew was anybody who had 3 or 4 grandparents that were Jewish. If you only had 1 or 2 grandparents who were Jews, then your classification was Mischling, either first or second degree. Anything further back than grandparents didn't count under the Nuremberg laws. In Israel, a Jew can be somebody with a Jewish great-grandmother, provided that the descent is completely matrilinear from that point through the female line. A male Jewish great-grandparent doesn't count. In other words, if you've only got a great-grandparent who is a man and was a Jew, that doesn't make you Jewish, according to the rabbis in Israel. Okay, I mention this because one of Lenin's great-grandfathers was a man called Moshka Blank, who was a shtetl Jew. He converted to Christianity long before Lenin was born. Neither by the strictest requirements of Orthodox Judaism, nor by the Nazi Nuremberg laws on racial purity can this possibly mean that Lenin was a Jew. He wasn't a Jew. As far as I'm aware, I have no Jewish relatives at all, but I hardly know anything of my great-grandfathers. If one of those men, I mean, we're talking now the 1870s or the 1880s, if one turned out to be a Jew, would this mean that I suddenly became a Jew? It's hard to believe that it would. Lenin was not a Jew. The reason that some anti-Semites wish to pretend that Lenin was a Jew is simple. The idea that the Russian Revolution was a Jewish enterprise is a ludicrously flimsy one, and if Lenin can be made out to be a Jew, it would make this fantasy marginally more plausible. About 6.25% more plausible, to be exact. How can I be so precise about that figure? Let me explain. After the Bolshevik coup in October 1917, Russia was ruled by a council of people's commissars. It's a little bit like a provisional government. Lenin was the leader of the council. In the description to this video, I give a link to the Wikipedia article which lists all the members of this body. There were 16 commissars who were like ministers with responsibility for areas such as education, labour, war and so on. How many Jews were on this governing body? Well, there was just one, Leon Trotsky. That's it, 1 out of 16, making up 6.25% of the total. If only Lenin could also be regarded as a Jew, this would increase the proportion of Jews from 6.25 to a whopping 12.5% of the total. You see how handy this would be for those who subscribe to this anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. But wait, what about before the actual revolution? Surely Jews dominated the Bolshevik party. Since there were over 5 million Jews in European Russia, and they were very much discriminated against and oppressed, it's no surprise to find that they were keen to change the social order and they drifted toward revolutionary movements. Just before the revolution took place in 1917, the Bolsheviks were controlled by a committee of 30 people, the Central Committee of the Russian Social Democratic Labour Party, which was the official title of the Bolsheviks. Of this committee, 6 were Jews. This means, of course, that 80% of those in charge of the Bolsheviks were not Jews. And after they seized power, the percentage of non-Jews increased to 93.75%. The Judeo-Bolshevik theory, by the way, was devised by Alfred Rosenberg, the Nazi ideologue. That almost a century later there are still dupes who fall for it is little short of astounding.